There is a moment after leaving a narcissistic relationship that almost no one prepares you for. It is not relief. It is not freedom. It is a strange, disorienting silence that settles into your chest like fog. And in that silence, something terrifying happens. You begin to miss the very person who hurt you. You begin to question whether you were the problem all along. You wake up in the middle of the night reaching for someone who caused you pain, and you cannot understand why your body aches for the very source of your suffering. If this is where you find yourself right now, I want you to breathe, because what you are experiencing is not weakness, it is not madness, and it is not a sign that you should return. It is the predictable neurological and emotional aftermath of prolonged psychological abuse, and understanding it is the first step toward reclaiming yourself. Before we go any further, if this channel has ever spoken to something inside of you that no one else has been able to name, I want to gently invite you to subscribe, because everything we explore here is dedicated to helping you understand narcissistic abuse, emotional healing, and the slow, sacred work of psychological recovery. Stay with me, because what I am about to share with you may explain years of confusion in a single conversation. When separation finally happens, whether by your choice, by circumstance, or by what many people describe as a divine intervention they cannot fully explain, the mind does not immediately celebrate. It grieves, it panics, it searches the room for the familiar chaos it was trained to expect. This is because the human nervous system, when exposed to prolonged cycles of intermittent affection and cruelty, becomes chemically dependent on the pattern itself. The unpredictable rewards, the moments of tenderness sandwiched between devaluation, the tears followed by reconciliation, all of it creates a neurochemical loop involving dopamine, cortisol, and oxytocin that mirrors, in many ways, the mechanics of addiction. So when the source is suddenly removed, the body enters withdrawal. You may feel physically ill, you may cry without warning, you may feel a hollow ache that cannot be soothed by food, sleep, or distraction. And in that vulnerable state, the mind begins to romanticize, because the mind, in its desperation for equilibrium, will always try to return to what it knew, even if what it knew was slowly destroying it. This is the trauma bond speaking, and it is one of the most misunderstood phenomena in the entire field of relational psychology. A trauma bond is not love. It is not weakness. It is not a character flaw. It is a survival adaptation, a biochemical attachment forged in the fire of unpredictability. Your brain learned over months or years that safety could only be found in the same place danger lived, and so it fused the two together. That is why leaving feels like losing a limb. That is why silence from the person who hurt you can feel more painful than their cruelty. Because your nervous system was conditioned to interpret their attention, even negative attention, as connection, and their absence as annihilation. And then comes the guilt. Oh, the guilt. It arrives quietly at first, then grows into a tidal wave. You begin to wonder if you exaggerated, if you were too sensitive, if you should have tried harder, if the good moments were the real them and the bad moments were just stress. This is cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that occurs when two contradictory truths exist in the same mind. You know they hurt you, and yet you remember laughing with them. You know you were suffocating, and yet you remember feeling chosen. The mind cannot easily hold both, so it begins to rewrite the story in favor of the abuser, because loving someone who hurt you is easier to accept than the devastating reality that someone you loved may have never been capable of loving you back in the way you deserved. This is where many survivors begin to spiral. They mistake the cognitive dissonance for intuition. They interpret the longing as a sign that they made a mistake. They confuse the withdrawal for love. But intuition does not scream in panic. Intuition does not beg. Intuition whispers with quiet certainty, and it was your intuition, however faint, that led you out in the first place. Trust that voice. It knew things your mind was not yet ready to accept. The silence from the narcissist, when it finally comes, is another form of psychological warfare, whether it is intentional or simply the natural consequence of their loss of supply. When someone who once flooded your world with contact, drama, and emotional intensity suddenly disappears, the absence itself becomes deafening. You may find yourself checking your phone compulsively, misreading every notification, feeling both terrified they will reach out and terrified they will not. This is not because you want them back. This is because your brain is still scanning for the threat, still waiting for the next shoe to drop, still living in the hypervigilant state that abuse trained it to inhabit. Over time, as the silence continues, something unexpected begins to happen. The grip loosens. The manipulation, which once felt inescapable, begins to lose its power because it requires proximity to function. Without your reactions, without your attempts to explain yourself, without your emotional labor, the entire machinery of their control begins to rust. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, clarity returns. It does not arrive in a single moment of revelation. It arrives in fragments. You remember a conversation and suddenly see it for what it was. You catch yourself laughing at something and realize you had forgotten what your own laughter sounded like. You notice that your shoulders are no longer permanently raised toward your ears. You realize you have not apologized for existing in several days. These are not small things. These are the quiet resurrections of a self that was buried alive. For those who hold faith, this is often the point at which something deeply spiritual begins to unfold. Many survivors describe the separation itself as feeling orchestrated by a power greater than themselves, as though they were finally lifted out of a situation they did not have the strength to leave on their own. I want to speak about this carefully, because I do not believe it is my place or anyone's place to claim certainty about the specific intentions of the divine. But I will say this: across cultures, across traditions, across centuries of human suffering, faith has consistently offered something that psychology alone cannot always provide. It offers meaning in the midst of meaninglessness. It offers the possibility that your pain is not the end of your story. It offers a framework in which you are not alone, even when every human connection has failed you. Whether you experience God as a personal presence, a guiding intelligence, or a source of quiet strength you cannot name, faith can become a stabilizing force during a time when everything else feels unstable. It can hold you when your own mind cannot. And in that holding, healing has room to begin. But faith, in its healthiest form, does not ask you to bypass your pain or wait passively for a miracle. It walks alongside self-reflection. It welcomes therapy. It honors the wisdom of trusted friends, support groups, and professionals trained in trauma recovery. The people who heal most fully are often those who allow the spiritual and the psychological to work together, who pray and also process, who believe and also boundary, who trust in something greater and also trust the intelligence of their own body and mind. If you have found yourself drawn back to faith after leaving, or if faith is what carried you through the leaving itself, honor that. And if you are still finding your way, be patient with yourself. There is no correct timeline for the soul. If any part of what I am sharing with you is beginning to make sense of something you have carried for a very long time, I want to ask you gently to subscribe, to like this video, and to share it with someone who may need to hear these words tonight. This work reaches the people who need it most only when survivors like you help carry it forward. Your one small action could be the reason another person finally understands what happened to them. Now let us talk about what happens next, because separation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of one of the most profound transformations a human being can undergo. As the fog continues to lift, you will begin to notice a shift in the way you relate to yourself. The internalized voice of the narcissist, that constant critical commentary that once lived rent-free in your head, begins to quiet. You may catch yourself making a small decision, choosing what to eat, what to wear, what to say, without first mentally consulting how they would react. This is the return of autonomy, and it is one of the most sacred milestones in recovery. For years, your nervous system was outsourced to another person. Now it is coming home. With that return comes the slow rebuilding of self-worth, and this is where boundaries become essential. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are not acts of cruelty. Boundaries are the physical, emotional, and psychological affirmations that you exist, that your needs matter, and that your peace is not negotiable. Every time you enforce a boundary, no matter how small, you are sending a message to your deepest self that you are worth protecting. And that message, repeated over time, becomes the foundation of a self-esteem that no one can dismantle because it was not given to you by another person. It was built by you, brick by brick, from the ground of your own becoming. You will also begin to notice a change in the people you are drawn to. The chaotic, the charismatic, the emotionally unavailable. The ones who once felt intoxicating begin to feel exhausting. Kindness, which once felt boring, begins to feel beautiful. Consistency, which once felt suspicious, begins to feel like safety. This is not because you have lowered your standards. This is because you have finally raised them to match what you always deserved. The nervous system, once regulated, no longer confuses anxiety for chemistry, and in that recalibration, healthy love becomes not only possible, but recognizable. Many survivors ask me whether they should seek revenge, whether they should expose the narcissist, whether they should make sure others know what happened. I understand the impulse. When someone has stolen years of your life, distorted your reality, and walked away without accountability, the desire for justice is not only natural, it is human. But I want to offer you a perspective that has served countless survivors in my clinical experience. The most powerful form of justice is not revenge. It is your recovery. It is the life you build in the wake of what tried to destroy you. It is the laughter that returns to your voice, the light that returns to your eyes, the love that returns to your heart. Narcissistic individuals often struggle deeply with the sight of someone thriving without them, but even beyond that, your healing is not about them. It never was. It is about you finally becoming the person you were always meant to be before someone tried to convince you otherwise. And as you continue on this path, you will begin to discover a sense of purpose you may not have known you were capable of. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse go on to become extraordinarily compassionate, insightful, and emotionally intelligent human beings. The very sensitivity that was once weaponized against you becomes your greatest gift. You develop an almost intuitive ability to recognize authenticity, to sense manipulation, to hold space for others who are still lost in the